This is the Civil Fleet, the podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In today's episode, we speak with Jutta, who is the head of deployment on the MareGo, a relatively new refugee rescue ship operating in the central Mediterranean. Jutta is going to tell us how the MareGo's crew saved hundreds of lives in 2 operations in July. She's also going to tell us how difficult this was in the middle of the night with no help from the authorities, and she's going to tell us about the incompetence of the Italian coastguards. Before we get into today's show, I'd like to remind you that the Civil Fleet is not just a podcast, it's also a website with news reports, interviews, investigative stories and more. So go to civilfleet.com to check that out. Also, if you want to support grassroots media and would like to help us to continue to platform activists, refugees, journalists, lawyers, and all the different people that we've had on this podcast, then you can help us out by making a small donation. The Civil Fleet is entirely self-funded. I've not sold out yet. Don't not cram this thing full of ads. It's entirely self-funded by me. And my costs are super low, but any help you can give would be really grateful. So if you'd like to do that, you can go to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. Any donation you can give us will be greatly appreciated. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get on with the show. Jutta, thank you very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Jutta, you are working with the MareGo. Do you have a position with the MareGo? Do you have a title or anything at the MareGo?
Yes, I do. I really like it. It's called HOT. It stands for Head of Deployment, which with other NGOs usually is Head of Mission or Head of Operation. But my crew calls me HOT, so I think that's a big compliment.
That's pretty cool. I wouldn't mind that title either. So before we start, we're going to talk today about the MareGo and the missions you were on recently in July. But before we do that, Jutta, I wondered if you could tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up involved, in this solidarity sort of work.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's interesting, but I'm 29. I live in Berlin, and I studied in the field of international relations and European studies. And I think that's also what's gotten me involved, because I'm convinced that European solidarity is something great, and then it's really frustrating to watch the news and to find out that European solidarity can only work within Europe and is actually a really racist system that excludes people from their basic human rights. So I've been involved with following rather as an audience, or as a, it's like just watching it, what happened in the Mediterranean Sea since 2014, 15, 16. And I was working in Tunisia at the time, working in an office, being really bored by office work, but also learning French and Arabic. And therefore, I actually checked with Sea-Watch first what are the positions on board, and I could see me in the position of translating and mediating and trying to bring people together, especially working in Tunisia and knowing that also people from this country cannot just step on a plane and go to Europe, but they actually have to risk their life to ask for asylum or the basic human rights, was something that really motivated me to get active in this field and to support the Civil Fleet.
Yeah, that's a good. I can see how you got involved and how you wanted to get involved. Just watching what's happening is it's pretty scary what's happening, right? And European solidarity is something that Europe often talks about, but it feels like it's completely lacking for black and brown people from Africa or Asia and this kind of places.
Yes, but I think the Civil Fleet is the best example of where European solidarity actually exists. And then when you're on the ship, you have this huge contrast of what's happening inside of your crew, and what's happening together with the rescued people once you have them on board. And there is a lot of solidarity, also from them to us. So it's not only the crews, but when you watch the states or political actors you really question it.
Yeah, that's what I meant from like a governmental level, right? It's just like appears to not be there, but within people, it's always there. So, can you tell us, Jutta, about the MareGo? It's quite a new organization, I think, or a new rescue ship. I think it has links. We were talking just before we started recording that I think it's linked with the old ship, Mare Liberum.
Yeah, I think it's a new and an old ship at the same time. The MareGo actually has a really nice history. It's a fishing boat older than 100 years,
Wow.
something that I find really fascinating to think about. And the MareGo was first put into the Mediterranean Sea, I think it was 2015 by Sea-Watch. It was the very first Sea-Watch ship, never intended to rescue, always intended just to call the Coast Guard and the states who are responsible for help. So, but that very quickly changed because the crew of Sea-Watch noticed that the states just don't act. So they started to rescue themselves, noticed the ship is actually way too small. And that's really true. It's a really small ship to do rescues in the central Mediterranean Sea. And this is how it became Mare Liberum. Sea-Watch got bigger ships, and Liberum used it for human rights observations in the Aegean Sea between Greece and Turkey. And now there are two people who bought the ship and who are now organizing this. So there's not a huge NGO standing behind it. It's really just solidarity in its essence. And they wanted to bring it back to the central Mediterranean Sea again because right now the situation has also changed. There are many boats coming from Tunisia to Lampedusa, so actually in an operational area where the state actors at least sometimes act. So it gives us a bit more room to maneuver with such a small vessel instead of having always to take all the people on board to support them until help is coming. So it's going a bit back to its original sense, but still it's performing rescues as well, and it's quite a challenge to do it on such a small asset.
Yeah, it's amazing that the boat is like over 100 years old. It's just that must be like it must be great just to be on it. It's like a piece of history, isn't it?
Yes, it's really beautiful as well. It's it has its own charm.
And so we actually had Marie in episode 4 of the Civil Fleet podcast. We had an interview with Marie she was talking about the Mare Liberum. So if anyone listening wants to know more about the Mare Liberum and what it was doing in Greece, they should check out episode 4. But the MareGo, when did it become the MareGo? Because I think it was this year the Mare Liberum group, they put out a press release. I think I had a story on the Civil Fleet about that mission coming to an end. And when did it become MareGo?
I actually don't know when exactly it became MareGo, also because it was a process of transferring the ship from the Aegean Sea to Italy, which is a really long ride for such a small shaky boat. Everybody usually gets seasick on this boat. But I think it had its first deployment in the beginning of the summer. So I was on the deployment number 3. So you can imagine it's quite new and it's gaining its experience. And yeah, it was also an honor to be part of this process.
Great. And I think if I'm right in thinking when the sea rescues kind of first started, I think it was around 2015-16, the boats would go out, like the activist boats would go and they would wait for people, and then as people on the move arrived in unseaworthy boats, they would wait with them for the national coast guards to arrive, and they would take the people back to land. But then that changed. The state stopped trying to rescue people, and that's why you have situations where, like the Jutta, which I think is also quite a small boat, had to bring people on board and take them to land, which wasn't the case. That wasn't the case, but that's what it's been like, at least I think since 2018-19, maybe earlier.
Yeah, I think it summarizes it quite well. I've experienced it myself. My first deployment was in 2018. And that was already the time where the states always asked us to bring the people to Italy. So I think over the history of the civil fleet, it's a really good example for the externalization of European borders. So what Europe is trying to do is to push the borders more south. No, actually more north, so that people in the south are apparently responsible. So the so-called Libyan Coast Guard is supposed to take over, and the operation areas of the European assets have always gone more north. So actually, by that, they don't feel responsible anymore for distress cases happening in the south. So this is why it changed a lot from, as you said correctly, 2015, where the civil fleet could still transfer people or support them on going on Coast Guard vessels, whereas when I started in 2018, that was already not a thing anymore. And in 2018, there was a big switch because the criminalization went so far that they started to stop civil sea rescue boats from leaving port. And what we have right now is that every time that the bigger ships go back to port in Italy, that they're afraid of being not able to leave port again. So usually they have more people on board and stay down for several rescues instead of going back and forth for each rescue. So I think here's a shift happening again on the so-called Tunisian route, so between Tunisia and Lampedusa, where right now a lot of more boats are coming, and I think it's getting to really new high numbers that we haven't experienced before. And because this is so much closer to Italian to Italy, to Italian land, there are actually the Italian Coast Guard is a present actor there, and that was something that really surprised me from coming from south of Libya, where I usually was in the operation area, to this other more north area where there are still state actors around.
Yeah, you mentioned Tunisia there. Like the situation there is absolutely horrendous. It sounds like I think this summer it seems there's been a lot of people leaving from Tunisia, right? And I've seen pictures from like refugees in Libya. That group refugees in Libya, of people like stuck in between the border of Tunisia, Libya, and I think Niger, and they're stuck there. Just oh my god! But that's a separate thing that is awful.
But it's not so separate because I think it explains what's happening. Because in Tunisia right now, there's a lot of racism. The president really said really racist things very publicly, and kind of by that giving an okay to discriminate even more. And what's happening right now is that Europe puts pressure on Tunisia not to stop people from leaving by a boat. So they're actually actively putting people into the desert to die, black people in the desert to die. So it's a really racist problem what's happening there, and this is the effect that we see right now. Like for us, it was not even possible to go to the Libyan search and rescue zone, because by going there, you go through the Tunisian zone, and I was really shocked by the sheer number of boats in distress that are there every day. Like every day we had between 20 and 30 distress calls that we knew of, not even mentioning the numbers you don't know about.
Yeah, that's right. There's so many boats, right, that are in the sea that don't get rescued. And, I think quite often you'll see, if you're following, like I do, all the different civilian rescue organisations, if you follow them on social media, they're often posting pictures of boats, empty boats of people that must have died or God knows what happens to them. But yeah, God. So yes, that's the MareGo. Let's talk about your missions that you were on in July. I believe there was two, right? There was two rotations. I'm not sure if that's the right term. Two.
Yeah, I think it's a bit confusing. We did one rotation, so one fixed time where we as a crew planned to go out. And because we rescued so quickly, which even surprised us, like we directly found too many cases, and took them back to Sicily, we decided as a crew to go 2 times. So what we did is we left from our home port in Sicily, we went to the search and rescue zone, we supported rescues, we also took people on board, brought them to Trapani in Sicily, and then we did this one more time, going down and going up to Trapani again. So this is why it looks like 2 rotations, which on our organization's schedule is just basically one.
I see, yeah. So can you tell us about the first part of that rotation? I think you assisted like 200 people and you had to bring people on board. Can you tell us about that operation?
Yes, so we went down to the area between Tunisia and Lampedusa, and we had distress calls reported by different organizations, and there was one we were heading to, so we sent our RIP, our fast rescue boat, ahead of us to look for that case, but they didn't find it. However, on the way back, I think it was that they encountered 2 cases. I've never seen them with my bare eyes because I was on the MareGo in that moment, but we supported our RIP from the MareGo in supporting those 2 cases. And actually in this situation, the Italian Coast Guard came very quickly, or was even on scene very soon, to take the people of both boats to Italy. So what we did is that we supported them with life jackets and communication, and to keep the crowd calm until there was a bigger boat to rescue them. Yeah, that was the first 2, and we had 6 rescues in total on that day. So after that happened, our RIP crew encountered a 3rd boat. I have to count. It sometimes gets really confusing. Which boat was which boat. So I hope I don't screw that up now. So there was one boat coming that they were then sending to us because they had another case to attend to. And maybe I think actually that was one of the 2 cases I just talked about. So one of the 2 cases they were sending to us for support, so they didn't have to leave the boat alone, and while they attended to the other case. And the Coast Guard, yes, exactly. So one of the 2 cases came and picked them up then from our vessel. So what we did is we supported them alongside of MareGo and waited until the Coast Guard came, and then they took the people. And that was interesting because I remember that we were very busy, and then the Coast Guard asked us to give them water because they didn't bring enough water while they were out to rescue people who are in distress and obviously don't have enough water. And it was these days it even made the news in Europe, where temperatures reached up to 50 degrees in Europe. So water should be one of the most essential things. So yeah, we gave the people water to bring it up to the rescue boat of the Italian Coast Guard, because there were more people. Like, they didn't only perform rescues with us, but also with other organizations. Yeah, so that was the first cooperation we did with them. So yeah, they were really friendly, and we supported them with water. I still think it's weird that they were not prepared for this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. That seems like one thing you would absolutely have to bring along, right? If you're a Coast Guard ship and you're rescuing people, you need water.
Yeah, it's the most basic thing. Yeah, I have more about the water problem in Italy later on, but we will get to that. And then we had one boat that just showed up on scene. So they were just moving directly to MareGo while our fast rescue boat was still out supporting other cases. So one just found us. We were just there. I think it shows how many boats are around there in one moment. I was really shocked by. You also see a lot of empty boats floating around, so it's also very difficult for us to determine whether people are inside or not from far away. You don't want to end up wasting your energy and time hunting boats where people are already rescued and taken out. Of course, you're happy if you know they were rescued and it's sprayed on the boats, but still, it's tough to see how many boats are around. So that was the 3rd boat coming to us, and then our RIP. I'm trying to count 6 boats. You see how confusing it is if there's so many. And then our RIP supported 2 other boats, and they were in quite a critical state. So one of them was already breaking apart when they came also to MareGo. And then so you have the ship, and on 2 sides we had 2 boats stabilized behind each other alongside of our vessel, and we had then at some point a 3rd boat on the other side. So we had a total of 6 boats. I would just stop explaining which one was which one because I think I'm too confused. You know, if you're in this tunnel working, you will not have the overview anymore at some point. And then the Italian Coast Guard actually did something I didn't see them doing in a while. They actually did their job of coordinating. So not the Coast Guard, but the MRCC in Rome, which is the coordination center. And they asked another civil rescue organization, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, with the Geobarons to come up to our position and to rescue from the boats that we stabilized. I think it was a total of 200 people that day. Some were already taken by the Coast Guard, and we still had more than 100 people alongside our vessel. So luckily geobarons could support us and take 2 of those boats. The last case we had was really close to capsizing, so our rescue boat had already evacuated people. They were already for several days on the water. So it was really tough and just took a really long time. But in the end, with 2 civil assets and some Coast Guard ships, we managed to support them and took some people on board and took them to Trapani in Italy.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a chaotic mission, and I can completely understand why you might not remember how many boats or which boat was where, and it's just like a chaotic situation to be in, right? It's hard to know exactly what's going on.
Yes, luckily we always document everything, so at least if this sounded really confusing on our ship, it's really organized. But I don't have the documents here to verify, so now you have to deal with my messed up brain.
And I'll just say that RIB, I think it stands for rigid hull inflatable boat, or just rigid inflatable boat. And those are like if anyone listening, if you Google RHIB or RIB, you'll see the kind of boat that it is. It's like you have your ship, and then you have these kind of rescue boats that go and approach the refugee ships or the people on the move, right? That's how it works.
Exactly, but they're actually really nice because they're inflatable, so they have this tube around them, which is really soft, so people can sit on it. Also, if you go close to a person you want to try to take out of the water, you don't risk injuring them. But it actually was quite a trouble for us having this boat because the boats in between Tunisia and Lampedusa are usually iron boats. They're just welded by people in Tunisia. They're not very strong and they have really edgy points. So what happened with the very last boat that was about to capsize and where our RIB crew had to take people off, there was only one position where they could really take people off without threatening the boat to capsize, and that was a point with really sharpy ends. So we actually deflated one major tube of our RIB of our speedboat in that moment, which was quite a hassle but possible to fix. But yeah, it's for our equipment a really tough situation in Tunisia with these iron boats.
Right, and again, it's just like it's crazy that it's up to civilian rescuers to do this. Like I often say in this podcast, I'm often saying like, "Oh, this is amazing that you've done this," and it is amazing that people like you have done this. It's fantastic, but you shouldn't have to do that, right? And that's something we have to remember. I have to remember that quite often.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, and what were the maybe we could ask this later, but what were the people that you rescued? Obviously, they were dehydrated and didn't have enough water, but what was their condition like? You said some of the people had been at sea for days.
Yes, I think the boat that we in the end took, I'm not sure anymore how long they were at sea, but they were in I don't want to call it a good condition because it's never a good condition if you're in distress, but at some point you see so many boats that are in worse conditions that you start making this unfair comparison. So we didn't luckily have any major extra emergencies, let's put it this way. But we did have people who are who are dependent on medicine, for example, and then they're out of medicine for a couple of days. So we had a diabetic person who cannot get their medicine. We had pregnant women. We had really small children. We have people just being sick in general from this travel of not having enough to eat, but having to throw up because they get seasick. And MareGo is really shaky, so the chance of being seasick again on our ship is still really, really high. So emotionally, it's also really, really tough to handle what has happened to the people. So I think we were like stable with the group. The group was super cooperative. Actually, it was really, really it was nice to get to know them. It would have been nice to get to know them in a different circumstance. I want to stress that because they should have never been on this boat. They were really sweet children, and with children, I always have this dilemma of it makes our work really easy when we have people on board because they calm. If children are happy, they calm the whole crowd, also the adults, down. But children should not be in a situation like this, and also, the psychological distress shows itself differently on children, so the child might be happily playing, but that does not say anything about their mental well-being. So while it is for us in that moment a bit easier to handle that many people. It's just really sad to think about that small children have to end up on a ship like that.
Yeah, and I imagine like you must, if you've been in that situation, then you probably end up with some serious PTSD. I would imagine, um, because the stress of everyone but on board as if you've been at sea for days, you're running out of water. I can't imagine what that's like. It's absolutely
Yeah, I'm not a
horrific.
psychologist, but you notice the signs of distress in people every time, and I think, yeah, on the long run, this is something you cannot forget. Like it even impacts me, and I'm always in the safe position of being on a ship that I know that won't just like capsize any moment. And when I'm on the ship, I know we can go back to Italy, but being on a ship where you don't know if rescue is coming and you have to be there with a lot of terrified people and you're actually afraid of dying, and it's actually not unlikely that you will. Um, I don't ever want to make that experience myself.
And so was that rough? Did I think it was roughly about 200 people in that first part? Was it?
Yes,
Oh,
I think about that, but it's just too much is happening in very short time on a civil sea rescue vessel. So now a week later, it's already a big mix-up in my brain. So I don't know an exact number anymore. I would have to look it up.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I think at the time on your social media you said 200 people, but we don't need to know
Yes,
exactly.
I
But
think it
yeah.
was about that. Yeah, it also fits with like six boats. Yeah, that's about right, I guess.
And so that was the first part of the rotation, the July rotation. So can you tell us about the second one?
Yes, after I thought the first part was crazy, the second part got even crazier. And what was really difficult after the first part, so when we took the people to to shore in Sicily, we left the search and rescue zone, and you still get the distress calls, you still get the emails about boats still being there, and that's a really, really tough feeling. You know, you cannot do anything anymore because your capacity is just full. Um, yeah, but having to hear the distress calls and them being repeated all over again, I think that was also something why our crew decided to go. We were like tight in time, but it was still possible, and we all decided to go again. And it just, yeah, it's tough not to do something. I struggle much more with not being able to support than actually having something to do. So we went back to the search and rescue zone, and on the way there, we just kept writing because there were so many VHF calls coming in. So some are coming from fishermen, some are coming from Frontex helicopters, some are coming from civil airplanes, from Pilot Volontaire or Seabird from Sea-Watch. And then we get information via alarm phone. So at the end of the day, you're going there over hours and you're collecting a whole list. You put them on your chart and you're just like, where do you have to go first? Because there's simply too many, and making the decision of where you go first impacts what's happening to the other boats potentially. So what we did is we just could not really decide, so we decided to go into the middle of a place where there were a lot of boats around that we already knew of, and also that Italy already knew of. So you hear Lampedusa radio answering that they actually heard the distress call over the day, the same distress call about 2 boats in distress the whole time from 8 in the morning, and you arrive there at 5 p.m. and there's no help there. There's no state, and the boats are actually there. It's exactly like you heard it. You could like follow this case the whole day, that there are 2 boats in distress. You know the authorities know about it, and there's no one when you arrive. So once we arrived, we didn't find only 2 boats in distress. We found 4, and we saw little dots on the horizon. So we already had a feeling that there might be more boats around. Communicated this directly to the Italian authorities, and I stressed directly that we are not equipped to help that many boats, that we do not have enough life jackets for that many boats, and that we urgently need support. So this happening in the afternoon, it ended up being, by the time sun was setting, 7 boats in total that we tried to support. Some of them, the engine was still running, of some others, the engine was not running. So you could imagine that with just the MareGo and 1 speedboat in the water, you cannot attend 7 boats at the same time, and if they don't have an engine, they're actually drifting apart. So with every hour, the situation got worse because you don't see the boats from close up anymore. You see them as a little dot far away, and you kind of try to keep an overview, and the sun is setting, so you see less and less and less. And we communicated this to the Italian authorities. At some point, they said, okay, there is an Italian Coast Guard ship coming, but they didn't say when. And so all we could do is, because we also couldn't go into a rescue of one boat, because if then something happens to the other boats, you cannot attend to them. So we put the priority on keeping them stable with water, with life jackets. We didn't have enough life jackets. That was a big problem. And communication, and yet trying to keep them patient. And then it was dark, and there was one boat that was quite close to us who kept asking us to take them on board because they were really, really scared. So we put one light on them the whole time to not lose sight of them, because the speedboat couldn't attend. So we tried to kind of split the task of keeping track of all these boats. And that's been, I was actually hearing really, really loud screams from one side of our boat. And I remember that I was not sure if this is actually where our speedboat is right now. I totally lost the orientation. I just knew there's one far away group of people calling urgently for help, and I don't know what's happening there. And our speedboat went in the end to assess the situation, and turns out there was a new boat arriving, and there were 15 people in the water, and they were already at sea for some time. They were in a really critical state. That was about the time that the Coast Guard had arrived, so we put the priorities on the worst cases first, which was this one, and also one where there was a 9 months pregnant woman. And the Coast Guard was always taking the people from our speedboat, because they sent a really, really big ship. They couldn't really, I think they couldn't, I don't know, they didn't disembark people from the distress cases themselves. So it was our speedboat shuttling to them, and I remember how angry I was, because it took ages to shuttle the people, and if you want to make it safely, you cannot take so many people at a time. So you could see with like 8 boats on scene. Later I found out it was actually 9 boats on scene that our crew had discovered. It just, you know you will be busy for hours, and you know it would have been much, much easier if they would have come during the daylight where you could still see the boats. So we put some lights on them, but we actually lost them a couple of times during that night. And I'm really happy that our crew, like, they sprayed numbers on the boats so we could in the end tick them off and see if all the boats were rescued. But still there's the fear, I don't know, is there a 10th boat that arrived that we didn't see? And yeah, that was really, really tough. In the end, the Coast Guard sent a second smaller Coast Guard ship as well, and they also performed rescues by themselves. But it was very obvious that they were depending on our information on where the boats are. They were depending on our lights on those boats to find them in the first place. And I'm not sure if those Coast Guard ships would have ever arrived to these cases that the Italian authorities knew of if we wouldn't have been there.
Yeah, that sounded really stressful, and like I think I'm not, someone from the MareGo was posting on social media the pictures of the boats disappearing, and I remember looking at one of those pictures. I'll link to them in the show notes. People listening can find that, so they can find the picture. But I remember looking at one of those photographs, and you could see a tiny dot on the horizon. And then I looked at it later. I was like, wait, there's 2. Mm-hmm. There's 2 boats on there. So one was so much smaller, and I just. And you were saying, and I saw that as you posted it, and you were saying, it's getting dark. And I just this is maybe an obvious question, but can you tell us, this is a stupid question, but I'm going to ask, why is it harder to rescue at night time? How is it harder to rescue at night than it is in the day?
Well, your vision is just extremely distracted. So, especially this night, there was rarely, the moon was, I don't know how to say it in English, if there's almost no, the opposite of a full moon.
Yeah, I can't remember what that is.
Anyway, the opposite of a full moon. So it's really weird. You have this super romantic Milky Way over you. You can see the nicest stars. But at some point, at some point we switched positions and I was also on the speedboat, and we were not sure if we were chasing a light on a boat or if we were chasing a star, because you cannot really see the difference anymore between the sky and the sea. So you have no sense of distances. You can be very close to a boat and simply not see them because it's so dark. Also for us to operate, it makes a lot of things very difficult, because also from the MareGo I cannot tell the difference if this is our speedboat or an Italian Coast Guard ship. Though sometimes you can see better if they're because they're bigger, but from far away everything looks just like a light. And there are more lights than just the lights that we put on the boats. There might be ships on the horizon that you couldn't even see before, but if they have a good light, you can see those. So you cannot tell apart what's anymore. And yeah, I think it's quite clear why it's really difficult.
So yeah, obviously the boats are going. And what do you do with the MareGo? Do you try and stay in the same position, or do you have to circle around? Do you leave your engine on? I mean, how do you operate there?
We tried to always keep distance to the cases, because people were also really desperate, and we still need to be able to maneuver in case people fall in the water or we need to support. So we tried to keep enough distance that people did not feel like they could just swim to our boat or come to our boat somehow, but they would not be too afraid that they lose sight of us. And also we are only 7 people in the crew. I don't know, we haven't mentioned that. It's just a very small crew, and you have 3 people on the speedboat, so you have 4 people on our boat. We had a unconscious pregnant woman to evacuate during the afternoon, so our doctor was attending to the pregnant woman. So you don't have many people. So what we did is to always try to keep the whole scene on one side of our boat, so we could see all the boats at a time. But when night fell, we lost it, because we did not know what was a boat and what was something else.
Yeah, I mean that must be really hard. Like obviously, keeping everyone on one side of the ship is a smart way to do it, and maybe that's how you always do it. But yeah, that's. I was wondering how you keep track of all these different boats. Like, do you have a map?
I think it always depends on the situation. It also, like, they were kind of lined up. It was somehow it. I don't know if this. You don't really have a good sense of orientation at sea. It's really weird. I find it always difficult to keep an overview, because the situation always is moving. Every single asset you have is moving, so you cannot remember. First there's this boat and then there's this boat. No, everything is shifting, and you are shifting as well. So you have to keep driving to keep positions, and it varies a lot during the whole operation.
And was your rib boat out? Was it like going between the boats, seeing if everyone was okay, or handing out water and life jackets and stuff?
I think that was the idea, but it ended up being more like we started with 2 boats, it became 4 boats, it became 6, 7 boats. So they actually happened to be constantly busy, and then they tried to go back to the boats and tell at least those that somehow were able to move to try to keep close to the MareGo, but most of them were not able to maneuver. And then they were busy attending medical cases. So once we had to evacuate an unconscious pregnant woman, to check on the woman that was 9 months pregnant and then started to feel pain, then there were the people in the water. So in the end, there were 12 hours on the speedboat, but constantly busy. There were rarely moments where they actually had the opportunity to do a round, but the idea was to go check on each boat and see. But often then you actually do encounter that there's a new emergency popping up. So this is why I was so angry at the situation, because it's not like this could have not been preventable. All of this was preventable. And the reason it was not prevented is that the Italian authorities didn't come. I don't know if they didn't come because they didn't want to, or if they couldn't at the time because of other rescues. But from the communication, it's something you can communicate if you couldn't come. Like once the second Coast Guard ship arrived, they actually said it's gonna take longer because they encountered a rescue on the way. So their communication did happen. So I'm actually doubting that there was a good reason for not coming earlier. And I think they were relying on us to make sure that people don't drown, which is not okay, because it's not our job to be there. To put 7 people in the responsibility of taking care of what ended up being in the end 600 people, it's just not okay if you have other assets to provide.
Absolutely, yeah. I completely understand what you're saying, yeah. And there was people. One of the boats, did it capsize or what happened? Because there was people in the water, right? Your rib had to get people out of the water.
Yes, we're not really sure because that's a boat that we didn't see before. Our assumption was that, from how I understood the rib crew, is that the boat was about to drown or to capsize, but it was in a very bad position. So we're actually not sure if people on purpose went into the water to prevent the boat from being destabilized even more, because the people must have survived at least some time. It took a moment until our rib arrived from when we heard the screams. So I thought the people could swim, but then I asked the rib crew and they said there were people who barely could keep themselves over the water. So we don't know exactly what happened there. And also that boat was evacuated to the so-called to the Coast Guard. This is the Coast Guard. Yeah, so we don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's quite traumatic, and thanks for telling us all of that. I don't want to like re-traumatize you or anything, but they are. I mean, obviously, the people on the boat went through a lot worse, but like, yeah, it's so good that you guys are there. So after the rescues, the Italian Coast Guards, they took on the majority of people, right? Because your ship's quite small. How many did you take? I can't remember exactly, but you took a group of people.
We took 57 people. I think on our social media it said 50 because we never managed to count them until shortly before we arrived. It was so difficult because there's no way you can step anymore on a boat. It's so full if you have 57 people apparently. So at some point when everybody was eating, I tried to make a round and we were like, oh, okay, it's actually much more than we like. Seven doesn't sound so much, but on a boat like this, 7 additional people is quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have time. Obviously, you've got much more important things to do than go, yes, there's exactly 57 people on the boat, right? Um, did you take them to Sicily?
Yes, to Trapani in Sicily, we took them. I forgot one thing about the night rescue. We want to talk about the life jackets.
Yes, yes.
So what? One last thing that was difficult doing night was we had life jacket. I think the MareGo is like 250 life jackets, which was not enough in that situation. We did not expect to encounter that many boats, to be honest. But then the Italian Coast Guard ships took the life jackets because they took the people wearing the life jackets. So it's not like they stole them from us, but they just evacuated the people wearing the life jackets. And they thought it was a good idea to put the life jackets into those iron boats that we already had trouble finding when there were 50 people on and lights on. So without lights and without people, they were impossible to find. So they put the life jackets just back on those boats for us to pick them up, and we just lost half of our life jackets that night, and that's a lot of money. Each life jacket cost, and those are already the ones with a good price, I think €8. So yeah, it's really tough if you're a donation-based organization that stuff like this happens. That's also very easy to prevent. It's not difficult to do a short VHF call and be like, hey, come here, pick up your life jackets, and you throw them into our boat. Yeah, so that was really a hassle as well.
Yeah, that's really frustrating. Like, it just seems like they could have kept the life jacket, so, they could have done something else with them rather than just chuck them back into sea. Are you is MareGo fundraising to try and I mean, I guess you're constantly fundraising, right?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because there's not really an NGO back office. Yeah, fundraising I think is actually a really big issue in civil sea rescue all the time because it's a lot of extra work and yeah. Yeah, we need donations. So if you happen to be rich while you're listening this, please donate to MareGo.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll include links to that, and I'll always share them on the Civil Fleet's social media as well. So yeah, I think Jutta, I think I've asked everything I wanted to ask about the rescues in July. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? Was there any other points you wanted to say about the rescue sides?
Well, the rescue itself not, but the rescue is only completed if you take people to a safe harbor, which we tried to do with those 57 people. And there was another moment that stuck to me when we arrived in Trapani. we were asked, like, you arrive and there's like 30 men in uniform, in different uniforms, and you have no idea who they are, and nobody comes up and introduces themselves. So we kind of park our ship, we have the people on board ready to disembark, and nobody tells how they want the procedure to be done. So I took the initiative and asked who's responsible, and none of them felt responsible. So I'm like, is somebody responsible? And I felt like that actually triggered them a bit, because from my perspective, I think there was nobody responsible in charge of organizing this disembarkation process. So we kept asking for support, or kept asking for some guidance, and there was nothing coming from that side, except for at some point when I kept persisting, there was this one man saying that they could not start so it was 38 degrees in the shade. People were still seasick and very weak on our boat. We managed to disembark 4 pregnant women, the other people still on the ship. And we wanted them just to move 20 meters from our ship to the shade where they have like this tent when they arrive. And this guy tells me it's not possible to do this because they forgot the 57 bracelets they need for registration. And they didn't even forget it like in their car or something. They just didn't bring them. And I was like, you just have to move the people and make them wait in the sun, not in the sun, but in the shade. And they were like, no, that's not possible. So I asked them for water. And here we come to freshwater problem with Italian authorities part 2. They didn't bring fresh water for the for the rescue of 57 people who have been at sea and are dehydrated still and who are seasick. So in the end, it was us again trying to provide fresh water, and we ran out of our bottled water. So we were trying to refill bottles with our water maker on board, which is quite a hassle. It's not like you just pass out the water. And it made me so angry, because I think it shows where the priorities are, to send a lot of police there, just standing there. Nobody's even, I'm really not sure what their job is, to be just standing there, instead of supporting the people to get fresh water and to sit down and to get into the shade. Like, our boat is really not meant to keep people on board for a long time. It's not a cruise, and it's so inhuman to put people in a situation like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it's not a cruise ship, is it? You're supposed to, people come on there and get off straight away, right? On dry land. That's what's supposed to happen. Like, and if they, it's something we say all the time on this podcast. But if these people were European, if they were white Europeans, they'd have been off that. You'd have been, this situation would be completely different.
Yes, exactly. And it's also so difficult because they're in this vulnerable situation where they want to enter this country, and you want to enter a country on good terms. So it's so bad because they don't, in that moment, it's difficult for them to really point out how bad the situation is. And it makes me so mad that people are put in this situation to just accept it, because they are not in the powerful position here. And I feel like the authorities are extremely exploiting their powers here, not giving people the chance to just take a moment to breathe. In the end, it was the medical team from the Italians that was most helpful. So we sent our doctor to state that the situation was not acceptable. And in the end, they were actually able to help us to evacuate people and put them out. And there was nobody, I think they were not capable, like, this was really the impression, at least, that I've got, to say, okay, now we organize it like this, or even to provide 2 people to pull them up from our boat, which is lower than the harbor. So we had to do everything ourselves together with their medical team. And I just really hope that in the shelter that they were brought to, that they will find people who are actually there to support them and to support their security.
I hope so. I mean, it's such a Europe's handling of the situation is clear from what you've been saying, that they're not prepared. They're not prepared for this situation, but they should have been, because this situation's been going on for years, right? And it's only getting worse, I suppose. There's only more people coming, right?
I've had disembarkation processes before with the bigger vessels, and then usually you have more NGOs there, like the Red Cross or the UNHCR, and usually they're it differs from port to port, but I've seen disembarkations where it was organized and worked out. So it's not like there isn't some expertise. It just they were just not there when we needed them, and when the people needed them.
Yeah, it's bad. It's crazy. There was something else I wanted to ask about that, and I can't remember now what the question was. So I guess what we'll do is we've been speaking for almost an hour now. So I think if it comes back to me, then I'll ask it. But if not, then let's move on to how are you feeling about the question I always ask, the last question I always ask people on the podcast is, how are you feeling about the future of of migration in Europe and the borders and the situation that we're talking about. How do you feel it's going? Is it going to get any better? What can people do about it? This is the big, huge, horrible question I like to ask at the end.
Yeah, I think it didn't have to be a horrible question. If there was any good news to report, it could be also a really optimistic question. But unfortunately, I think the answer to this is really horrible because I was really surprised myself, even though I'm informed about the situation in the central Mediterranean, how much the numbers have risen right now, especially with the situation in Tunisia. And my own surprisement is what I think renders me really pessimistic about it, because it shows that in the news in Europe and the debates and discourses in Europe, the topic has become so normal, and the feeling of not being able to change it is already so strong that even I think in the group of people that is informed about the situation, this doesn't seem to be news, even though it should be news. So I think people are a bit, resignated. Is that something you say in English? Okay.
Yeah, resigned to.
Resigned?
Yeah, you kind of resigned to something. It means
Resigned.
you just accept it. Yeah.
Yeah, resigned by not being able to, impact politics. So the idea of starting the civil fleet to just fill a vacuum that is left after the Italians stopped doing sea rescue, and hoping that Europe at some point would start state-led sea rescue. I don't feel anymore like we're just trying to close a gap here. I feel like we're the ones taking over, and that shouldn't be us doing. And it's also not okay that we do this. The people have a right for professionals to go there and rescue them. So I think I don't see this coming anytime soon. I'm hoping. So the one thing that does make me optimistic, though, is that the civil fleet always has new vessels joining. That with a small boat like the MareGo and 7 people, that you can actually make a difference, at least for the people that you see there. So of course our work is just like literally just a drop in the ocean. But for the people that we met during this rotation, it is important. And I think it shows that solidarity can exist. So I think as long as we manage to keep this positive example, at least it's clear that it's the European Union that doesn't want to act, and not that there is no way to act and that there wasn't the solidarity to act. I don't know when this will change. I will just stop answering this question because it's really depressing.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think I sort of, one of the reasons I want to do this podcast is because I want people listening to see that you can take action, that you can, people are taking direct action against this situation, and other people can do that too. It doesn't have to be, organising a ship to rescue people in the Mediterranean, particularly if you're in Britain, is quite difficult, right? Because we're not in the Mediterranean. But, but people can get involved in support stuff. That's why we have not just rescuers on the podcast, but people involved in support work within Europe. So I think it's really important.
And that's the solidarity we depend on. If there aren't people in Europe still wanting a progressive migration and asylum system, then it's also very difficult for our job. But I think it works only if the whole civil society works together. And it's impressive how many also like small towns and cities express their solidarity. So they're actually showing to state actors who don't want to take more migrants or take more asylum seekers, that their own peoples are into this and open to it. And that's, I think, the optimistic note that we can find here at the moment.
Absolutely. I think so too. Well, Jutta, I can't remember what I was going to ask. So we'll have to leave it. Hopefully it wasn't like the best question I've ever thought of.
It's okay. I think we take it a lot. And if it's just a private interest of yours, you feel free to send me a message or you add it to the show notes afterwards.
Yeah, if I remember, maybe I could send it, we could record it, we could add it on. But I don't think I'm going to. My memory is terrible. So yeah, that was a really great interview, Jutta. I will put links for people listening on how to follow MareGo, where to donate, and your website and this kind of stuff. Yeah, that was really great, and thanks very much, Jutta. Hopefully I've said it correctly in this podcast. I will be in touch.
Thank you for inviting me and for also tackling this important theme.
Well, that was episode 45 of the Civil Fleet podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks again to Jutta for coming on the show and talking to us about the MareGo, and thanks to the MareGo and everyone who works with them. Since we recorded this episode in July, the MareGo has been back at sea and saving lives. So check out them on social media to find out more about those. Also check out the show notes. I'm going to have things that we've discussed in there, links to the MareGo and how you can help them out. And if you'd like to help the Civil Fleet, remember you can check us out on social media. You can share us around. You can share this podcast. Try to get it known. You can contact us if you like on info@civilfleet.com, or you can DM us on social media. I'm often on there and will respond to stuff. Also, if you'd like to help us out, to help us to continue producing this grassroots stuff, then you can do so by going to co-fi.com/civilfleet, and you can make a small donation there. Any help will be greatly appreciated. Right, hopefully I'll have another episode pretty soon in September. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, see you soon. Bye-bye.